my name is Sharonda Williams-Tack. I'm a senior attorney with Sierra Club's environmental law program, and my primary work is around energy justice. And so really trying to make sure that we can advocate for folks to have affordable bills, especially in low income and majority people of color communities. COVID, of course, caused another recession. And so there are people who are now out of work and can't pay their bills. And I think it was a real eye-opener for the United States. I think people didn't realize that this is a problem that really existed before COVID and now is just so much larger because we're in a pandemic. People on a daily basis just can't afford their bills. And so really need help from LIHEAP as well as assistance from the utility companies. With COVID, there's a real eye-opener around the fact that energy is a right. I think people weren't really thinking about it in that context. And I think when people were, again, like you said, stuck on home, people with medical issues, and really realizing without my energy, I cannot function for my job. I cannot function for my family. There's so many things that people are like, wow, this is, we need to make sure that people just have access to energy. It's not something that is really, there's no choice. It's not something we can't not have. We need it to function with our families and to function society and to be able to pay our bills. And a lot of people just don't have access to energy. There's so many people who are so energy insecure. And I think COVID really showed us just the mass of people in the United States that don't have ready access to energy. And so need programs like LIHEAP, to pay their bills. I know there are a couple of states that paused late fees, just because, again, you come out of, how many months moratorium for. There was some that lasted a year. So if you have like fees on top of fees, how is it really helping people? And in generally, we're an organization that advocates against late fees. It's not really, it's supposed to act as an incentive, but someone who's already in poverty can't afford their bills, then what's really the point? It's just punishing someone for being poor. I think LIHEAP has, it got put into place because it was a need, and I think it's really been essential ever since. We have pockets of this country where poverty is such a huge issue. I do a lot of work in the Southeast. Look at states like, Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi, and people are just, they're so poor, and their houses are really energy inefficient. And so you have people that have, leaky roofs, holes in their windows, and so they're wasting energy they're not using because their houses aren't energy secure. And then they're, again, very impoverished and just don't have a lot of access to jobs. And so there's a real need in this country for, I think, both bill assistance, but also really pairing LIHEAP with weatherization and making sure that as folks are getting bill assistance, they're also making sure their home is more efficient, because, we want people to have affordable bills. We also want them to live in homes that are healthy, safe, and comfortable as well. And to be perfectly honest, the Sierra Club, our mission has always been more environment. I think in the 90s, we more so started moving towards looking at environment as, also the humans who live there. And so really leaning into environmental justice. And that was really just tied to pollution we were seeing in communities, of course, tying it to, coal plants. We had the Beyond Coal campaign. That's one of our biggest campaigns, Sierra Club. But about 5 years ago, I've been doing work in Michigan for a number of years. And as we started talking to folks in Detroit, we said, what is the most prominent energy issue for folks in EJ communities? And they said, shutoffs. We're constantly being disconnected. We can't afford our bills. And so for me, I wanted to figure out how can I help those people? And so we really started leaning into working with utilities and making sure they were tying their energy efficiency programs to their bill assistance programs. So a lot of times those two arms of the utility aren't really having a conversation. And so they weren't ensuring that folks that are in arrears have been shut off, are constantly on bill payment plans. They weren't making sure if they had access to low income energy efficiency. And so we've been doing work for a number of years with DTE Energy specifically. And then when COVID happened, I think our organization really got it, and the volunteers got it. And they said, wow, we didn't realize energy burden was something that was so prominent. We didn't know people on a daily basis are having to choose between food and energy bills. And so people really gravitated to it. The folks on the ground we worked with were like, yes, this is a really important issue for us. And so we started to do a lot of work really focused on energy burden and how we can be working with our utilities, working with the federal government, making sure we have adequate LIHEAP funding, adequate, WAP funding, funding for health and safety repairs. And then also we're doing a lot of work in making sure that we're focusing on communities of color, because really when it comes to energy burden, energy insecurity, it's, majority Black households, Black female-led households, as well as the elderly. And so we've been really trying to make sure that we're able to work with our utilities, the federal government, our state governments, as well as our utility commissions to make sure that people have affordable energy bills. We think that is a right and not something that can be negotiated. It's interesting you said, because I just had a conversation this week with Roger Colton, who is energy expert, he actually created the definition of energy burden, that 6% that we use. And he said that his mother is someone who, her energy bills were really high, and there was a shame in applying for assistance. And so she wasn't taking her medicine. He's like, Mom, take your medicine, take the assistance. There's a real shame associated with not being able to pay your bill on time. And thankfully, Sierra Club, we have a community organizing arm of our organization. We have organizers that work in the community. And so I think a large part of the outreach that we're doing around energy burden is making sure people know that this is not your fault. A lot of times, we can, of course, tie housing stock issues to redlining and segregation from the past. And so there are a lot of people of color who live in communities that have housing that are just in repair. And it's really expensive to pay for a new roof or new windows. And there are a lot of programs that, don't provide that at no cost. And so I think it's really telling people there's definitely a historical tie to why your energy is secure, your neighbors are all energy secure. And so it's not a coincidence this is happening to you. But there are resources like LIHEAP, like the weatherization program, like, hopefully your utility has an energy efficiency assistance program and bill assistance, and that folks should really take advantage of it. So the big thing we're working on that I have really been leading within the Sierra Club is doing a sort of geo-targeting of where we're putting resources. And so we've been doing some work in Michigan as well as Wisconsin. Right now, we're in New Orleans pushing for this. And so when we look at energy efficiency programs, again, figuring out how are we getting energy efficiency to the people who can't pay their bills. And so how are we pairing energy efficiency with bill payment assistance? How are we looking at, where's energy burden? And so if we look at the city of Detroit, it's largely energy burden, but we can focus in on the census tracts where we're seeing that people have high energy intensity or just, can't pay their bills. How are we getting resources to those customers? Because right now it's if you call the utility, you get assistance, but there's not really a sort of intentional way to target, energy efficiency, say solar, again, making sure folks are on bill payment plans. How are we targeting people rather than them having to come to utility on their own? And so we're really trying to focus on like geo-targeting, utility resources to the communities that are most in need that may not know about the program. So when we first started this conversation, we spoke about the fact that there are a lot of people who don't know LIHEAP exists. So those same people don't know that utilities also offer free installation, free water heaters. And there are people who don't know this program exists because the marketing is not done really well, or if anything, it's not being, marketed in a way that's targeting people that it could really make a life-changing difference. And so really focusing on that piece of work. I've been doing a lot of work around PIPs, and so really pushing for percent on payment plans in the different states we're working in. We worked in Virginia and got legislation passed that forced the two major utilities, Dominion and APCO, to do PIPs for their customers, and also pair weatherization. So again, making sure that we're bringing people's bills down, but also making sure their homes are comfortable, healthy, and safety. And so really excited about that work. It's a win-win because when you think of energy burden, it's part poverty and then part home inefficiencies. And so if we can solve for the inefficiencies and also then create jobs in the community and create a pipeline, then we could, I think, solve this problem, to be honest. And so as we look at folks that experience bill affordability, it's usually renters. And so a lot of times you don't really have control over the house you live in and whether you have solar in your roof. And so we're always pushing for access to community solar. And one bad thing and good thing is you have a lot of neighborhoods that are low income that have, brownfield sites that may have been cleaned up, but you can clean it up so much. You can't really reuse that site for a lot of things. So a lot of times we're able to use that brownfield site and use it as a solar field. And then we can then create opportunities for community solar. But of course, when it comes to community solar, are we doing it through the utility? Is there legislation that allows people to subscribe? And so a lot of times it's really figuring out how to make it accessible through dealing with either legislation or hopefully getting a utility that's on board. And so we want to make sure that solar is accessible as possible. So if you're not able to have it on your home, then you have access to the energy savings and of course, just clean energy as well. So a lot of times it's really hard for us to get anything done in legislation because they're just blocking these solar bills. They don't want the competition a lot of times. So that's been a problem in a lot of places, which is really unfortunate because there are places we're really trying to do our best for places like, cities like Detroit and places where community solar could really, I think be something that's amazing for folks. And we can't get past utilities in a lot of places. Also, a lot of times it's bringing in other solar entities and it's so you're taking money from them because then there's this competition when it comes to solar. But even when we think about energy efficiency, that's also not the utility's best interest, right? Because the less energy people are using, the less that they're paying. But again, if you have people who can't afford their bills, you're constantly having to disconnect, reconnect, there's bad debt. And so there's so many reasons just to make sure that your customers can afford your bills. Besides it being just good for, just a social good, it's also good for the bottom line, the utilities. I think it's all about coordination. Of course, that gets tricky when you're in an organization of our size, but we definitely try to make sure that the campaigns are working closely with the lawyers, working with the organizers who are speaking to folks on the ground are impacted by, both energy justice and environmental justice issues. We have a labor department, so we have folks that have that labor background who work with unions and also work with organizations that work with unions and environmentalists. And so we're always trying to coordinate and use all of our arms. And I think that's what makes us so successful and so strong, is the fact that we have different areas, different skill sets, and we try to work together in order to win. For me, our lawyers are the ones that really, I think, fight the biggest fights when it comes to energy justice. And so utilities aren't going to do anything out of the good of their hearts. It's just not the way it works. And so there's going to be an energy plan that's going to be filed. Usually it's an integrated resource plan or a rate case, or I do a lot of energy efficiency plans. So they'll file their plan and they'll say, we're not going to invest much in local energy efficiency, and we want to, recover our costs. And we come in as lawyers and we bring in our experts like Roger Colton, who I mentioned, and we're able to then, intervene in this case and make our case before the Public Service Commission. And then usually what we try to do is enter into a legal settlement with the utility. And so a lot of the work we've been able to push in the state of Michigan with creating a geo-targeting initiative, we've reached that within the legal settlement, that we want them to do that work in a certain way, involve us during, key periods, make sure the community was involved. And then also after we're done, we're able to be a party to make sure that the program is implemented in the right way, because we were a part of the case. Unfortunately, these spaces are not, I think, very friendly for EJ advocates, because again, I think you need to come with a law degree, and there's a lot of, it's very technical. And so it's really not a space that should only be for folks like Sierra Club. We want to make sure that space is more accessible to folks who are being directly impacted by what we're advocating for. But definitely we enter these cases, you have to be a lawyer in order to intervene. And a lot of times we have colleagues that just bring in their policy people who aren't attorneys. And when it comes to the settlement part of the case, you kind of need to be an attorney to put in those details to make sure that we're really holding utilities accountable. And that, you want to tie in the legal language to make sure that we're getting what we want and that's going to benefit the customers. And so it's definitely played a part as far as, intervening, but also I think we're able to, as we're doing work on the ground, we speak to organizers around, how are we speaking about the legal issues? How are we getting people involved? And usually there's opportunity for public comments. So we try to make sure we're getting comments from people who are impacted by energy burden. And we're showing the commission that not only the lawyers care what's going on, but there are people who are being impacted by this. And that, unfortunately, it's not it doesn't really become a part of the case, but at least it's something that influences the decision. I can think of two stories that have really, actually many have stuck with me, but we do a lot of work we do work cross country. And so we do work in the Southeast, and we had a PETA organizer who was interviewing and speaking to people in South Carolina. And there was this one gentleman who, was on a fixed income, had issues with illness, and he would just take his heat off, and he would just suffer, and he'd be cold, because he knew if he turned the heat on, he wouldn't be able to afford his bill. Again, maybe he didn't know about LIHEAP, but the fact that he could, be able to have access to that. And I mean, in Detroit, we've heard of, I had someone speak to me from, what is that organization? I think they work directly with Michigan Welfare Rights. I talked to someone who worked there, and she said that she was sick of attending funerals with tiny caskets from babies that had died as a result of a shutoff, where people either froze to death or they use space heaters, and we can prevent that, right? Because again, we have these programs in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. And so when we see people that have access to LIHEAP and to, utility bill payment assistance, they can, keep their lights on, they can keep their family safe. I know that one of the primary reasons that kids are taken from their homes or the utilities aren't working. And so, I mean, we're saving people's lives. It's not even, saying in a way that is bigger than it is. It is a life-saving mechanism. And want to make sure that, and of course, I feel like there's not really enough funding. There's never enough funding for these programs. I know that we just got a huge increase, which was great, but I think part of it is increased funding. And then again, people knowing about it and getting the word out. And one little plug for Sierra Club, I created this energy burden calculator. It's a web-based, mobile-based tool. And so when we talk to folks on the ground about energy burden, they're like, it's kind of a hard thing to describe, right? Because it's a calculation of your income, times your energy bill and what comes out. And so people didn't really understand it. And again, didn't know that both the federal government, sometimes your state government utilities have access to, bill payment programs as well as energy efficiency. And so we create this calculator where folks can plug in their winter bill, their heating bill, their income, see their energy burden is, compare it to other folks in their state, and then have access to, but then here are resources. So we'll show them, how they get in touch with their light heat person in their state, their WAP person, and whether the utility also has programs to help with their bills. And so I think it's a great tool. We use it on the ground as we speak to people about the issue of energy affordability. And again, the biggest thing is folks just having a sense of what it is, taking away the shame of the fact you can't pay your bills, and letting you know there are resources available if you need them.